Welcome back. I am Alex.
And I am Jamie.
Listeners, regardless of your position on the Kent Deck repair assessment, we believe you should be informed with facts, not conjecture.
Everything we will discuss in this episode is drawn directly from the HOA's own records, reserve studies, meeting minutes, financial reports, and official correspondence. In our opinion, these documents reflect a consistent and traceable pattern. The Kent Deck repairs were not unforeseen. The need was identified, the cost was projected, the timeline was defined. Based on the materials we've reviewed, it appears the board had nearly 2 decades to plan accordingly. Yet the historical record suggests that over those years, the board made a series of deliberate choices, in our view, including repeated deferrals, reallocation of funds to lower priority projects, and missed opportunities to build reserves, despite clear professional warnings. Homeowners are now facing a $12,000 special assessment, presented as an unavoidable consequence. But in our opinion, the board's own documentation tells a different story, one in which the outcome you are now confronting was not only foreseeable, but with prudent planning might have been avoided. One item of note, we can only find records dating back to 1998. The HOA's incorporation occurred on July 19, 1990. What happened to nearly a decade of HOA records? This is a question we will leave to you. In this episode, we'll examine the HOA's own records to evaluate whether the historical documentation aligns with the narrative presented by the board today. Our focus is not on opinions or assumptions, it's on what the official documents say. We'll review the following topics. 1. Whether the board's records support the HOA president's July 2025 statement that the board worked with the best and most qualified. 2. Whether the documentation supports the assertion that the current situation was unforeseeable. 3. The 2006 reserve study, which recommended replacing the waterproof membranes on both Kent decks by 2013. 4. The 2009 engineering report, which advised full replacement of both Kent decks substrata. 5. The 2009 board records, which indicate that then-President Roger opted not to follow the recommendations in the 2006 reserve study and the 2009 engineering report. 6. Meeting minutes that reflect both President Roger and Treasurer Frank recognized risks associated with the Kent decks and expressed concern about their condition. 7. A review of due increases between 2006 and 2025 and whether they aligned with the capital repair needs outlined in the 2006 reserve study. 8. The financial consequences of not increasing dues during 11 separate years and the resulting shortfall in reserves. 9. A review of non-essential or discretionary expenditures that may have impacted the association's ability to fund the Kent deck repairs. All information discussed is drawn directly from HOA records. Our goal is to present the facts clearly so that you can form your own opinion with facts, not rhetoric.
From the HOA president's speech during the July 2025 board meeting, the board worked with the best people, the most qualified people, and nobody thought that there were structural issues because this was a brand new construction. Let's start with the president's assertion that they, assuming she means past boards, worked with the best people, the most qualified people. According to the very engineering report, the board is now citing to justify the urgent deck repairs. Quote, overall, the repair membrane was not properly installed.
Improperly installed membranes suggest the board did not work with the best or most qualified professionals. Not only were the waterproof repair membranes improperly installed, but the meeting records suggest a troubling pattern. Studies, temporary repairs, more studies, and still more repairs. In our opinion, this cycle does not reflect a board that consistently engaged the best or most qualified professionals. Listeners, consider this. A reserve study completed in 2006 recommended replacing both Kent decks membranes by 2013. Then, in 2009, a professional engineering report advised full replacement of both Kent decks substrata. And yet, nearly 2 decades later, the board appears to be revisiting those very same recommendations. How much time, energy, and HOA funds did the board spend, only to return to the conclusions reached in the 2006 reserve study and the 2009 engineering study? Do these facts support the narrative that the board worked with the best and most qualified?
Next up, let's review the second part of the HOA president's comment. Quote, "Nobody thought there were structural issues because this was brand new construction." We assume the HOA president means that earlier boards or owners believed no structural issues existed because Highgate was newly built. The first record of Kent deck leaks we could find is 4 years 2003, where the board's records note that there are cracks in the bottom of the planters. To correct this, the board lined the planters. HOA records from 2006 note the need to replace the waterproof membrane of both Kent decks in 2013. 2009 records document an engineer's recommendation to replace both Kent decks substrata.
Listeners, what do you think? Do the above facts support the board's narrative that nobody thought there were structural issues?
I am now reading directly from the 2009 HOA meeting notes. Roger, the then HOA president, said, "The board had taken a different approach from the reserve study, which may work. The work done on the decks pushes deck replacement into the future. It has the ancillary benefit of keeping the look of the community compared to the engineer's recommendation to tear out and replace the substrate of the deck, rebuilding the deck without planter boxes."
In 2006, the reserve study recommended replacing the waterproof membrane of both Kent decks in 2013. And in 2009, the board received an engineering recommendation to tear out and rebuild the decks, including the structural substrata, including the planter boxes. And the HOA president is on record disregarding both the 2006 reserve study and the 2009 engineering report.
That's correct. Those facts run opposite to the board's narrative. And there is more. The board's records also annotate explicit awareness on the board's part of the costs outlined in the 2006 reserve study, when in 2008, Treasurer Frank, speaking in support of then HOA President Roger, stated, he discussed the relationship between reserves and the engineering study. All reserve items total $2,470,000, with the association's biggest concern being longevity of the Kent decks and garage structure. In our view, that contemporaneous statement confirms that the board knew A, the overall scale of reserve obligations, about $2.47 million, and B, that there are issues with the Kent decks and the garage structure.
More. Did you catch the comment regarding pushing repairs into the future?
The board not only pushed the Kent deck repairs into the future, but the board's meeting notes infer the reason for doing so is to avoid a special assessment. A possible fact supported by a 2008 record, which quotes Treasurer Frank echoing the comments of then Board President Roger, that one goal of the association is to avoid the need for special assessments.
Listeners, keep these two statements by then HOA President Roger in mind for the next few minutes. Listeners, what you're now seeing on screen is Appendix C of the 2006 Reserve Study. The HOA's beginning balance that year was $362,587. Each year, the study subtracts the projected inflation-adjusted repair costs from the starting balance, adds estimated annual assessments, and includes a $17,000 addition. This adjustment is made to increase the yearly assessment above the current level while maintaining a positive end-of-year reserve balance throughout the study period, as noted by the study's authors. According to the study, if the board had completed the necessary capital repairs outlined in the plan, the HOA would have a $708,518 deficit by 2024. Did the board have a plan to address the funding shortfall?
That's a good question. Let's see what the historical documents say.
Listeners, your bylaws allow the board to increase the maximum annual assessment each year by up to 10% of the prior year's dues, or essentially the rate of inflation. Please keep this in mind, as well as the recommendations of the 2006 Reserve Study.
We reviewed the dues schedule, which only dates back to 1998. While the annual increases, based on the records provided, appear to comply with the bylaws, they were clearly inadequate to support the HOA's long-term financial needs. This opinion, we opine, is reinforced by the fact that the board failed to raise dues in 11 different years, between 1998 and 2025.
How much did that decision cost the HOA?
Listeners, the cost of those missed increases is greater than even we anticipated. Based on the historical dues schedule, we estimate that the HOA collected nearly $4 million in total dues over that 27-year period.
To be exact, the amount appears to be $3,781,170.76.
Over that same period, the average annual dues increase was 3.52%. Had the board applied just this average increase during each of the 11 years when no adjustments were made, we believe the HOA would have collected approximately $4,556,411.04.
That means the HOA potentially missed out on $775,240.28, and that's before considering any interest those funds might have earned over time.
Almost. The 2006 reserve study specifically notes that the HOA does not allow interest on reserve funds to compound. Instead, the board routinely transfers any interest earned from the reserves into the operational fund.
Why would the board transfer reserve interest into the operating account?
I can't say for certain. However, based on comments from Frank and Roger, it appears both acknowledge the funding shortfalls identified in the 2006 reserve study and expressed that one of the association's goals should be to avoid special assessments. Ultimately, the funds to operate the association must come from somewhere. Listeners, what are your thoughts? Why do you believe that the board transfers interest on reserves into the operating account? Does this sound like a best practice? We'll leave it to you to investigate whether this practice is still occurring today.
Listeners, you'll find a link in the episode description to a spreadsheet where you can adjust the percentage increase in dues over time. This tool allows you to determine whether dues could have been raised steadily and responsibly to ensure the HOA could afford the repairs outlined in the 2006 reserve study while still covering operational costs.
Using this tool, starting in 2006, we estimate that annual dues would have needed to increase by approximately 8 to 9% each year to accumulate sufficient funds for the repairs outlined in the 2006 reserve study. Listeners, what are your thoughts? Try adjusting the numbers yourself, and let us know what you think the average due increase should have been.
Alex, let's revisit your question regarding addressing the funding shortfall. In light of the 2006 reserve study, I believe that a pattern of recurring decisions contributed to underfunding, despite the board having clear notice of significant obligations dating back to 2006 and reaffirmed in 2009. Over time, the board has seemingly not raised dues in line with known needs, froze dues in 11 different years, and allocated money to arguably lower priority discretionary items, including social events, landscaping, speed bumps, multiple websites, walkway lights, and approximately $25,000 for mailboxes, and roughly $174,000 for backyard fencing. Listeners, remember this. Then-Treasurer Frank publicly supported then-President Rogers' view that the association should avoid special assessments. But after 2006, the board consistently chose not to raise dues, even as professional studies outlined major repair costs on the horizon. So consider this. If the board didn't raise dues and aimed to avoid special assessments, how exactly did they intend to fund the repairs they'd been warned about?
Deferring major repairs doesn't make the problem go away. It makes the eventual fix more expensive. And without a clear funding plan in place, you end up exactly where this HOA is now, underfunded and facing a crisis. In our view, this outcome wasn't unforeseeable. It was avoidable. But that's our perspective. Listeners, what do you think? Let us know in the comments.
Speaking of questions, I can understand funding lighting upgrades for safety. But mailboxes? Backyard fences? When you combine the nearly $200,000 allocated to those projects with the dues that were never increased, you're looking at almost enough to repair one of the Kent decks. Listeners, how does it sit with you that the board, fully aware of the mounting capital costs, chose to fund not only social events, spend over $25,000 on mailbox replacements, but also allocate approximately $174,000 to backyard fencing, multiple HOA websites, speed bumps, landscaping, multiple patches to the Kent decks, and more, all while the Kent decks continue to deteriorate? Lastly, we've mentioned this issue before. We were confused then, and we remain confused by the accounting and the planning surrounding the Kent deck repairs. In 2006, the Kent decks were assigned a useful life of 7 years, with an estimated repair cost of $400,000, about $664,000 in today's dollars. There was also a separate line item labeled Other Components associated with the Kents. That category was given a useful life of 7 to 27 years and a projected repair cost of $95,000, or roughly $158,000 today.
Those figures remained unchanged, or there is a gap in the records we have access to, until 2011, when someone updated the information.
In that 2011 update, the deck lifespan was changed to 0 to 18 years, and the estimated cost for repair increased slightly to $409,000. That's just a 2.5% nominal increase, which amounts to a decline in real dollars once adjusted for inflation.
At the same time, the other category was revised to have a lifespan of 2 to 18 years, and the cost increased to $175,000, an 84% increase.
This doesn't make sense. The recommendation of $400,000 in 2006 to repair the decks, taking into account inflation, in 2011 should have been, at a minimum, $450,000. I can't make sense of this.
I can't either. It gets more confusing. At the July 2025 HOA board meeting, the HOA president referenced a reserve study that allocated $77,000 for repairing the Kent decks. This, in today's dollars, represents an 88% decrease from the $400,000 recommended in the 2006 reserve study.
How does a $400,000 repair plan shrink to $77,000 with no explanation over 17 years?
This does not make sense to me.
As we wrap up this segment, here are 12 questions we think every Highgate homeowner should be asking. 1. Why has the board never, in conversations about the Kent decks, shared the 2006 reserve study or the 2009 engineering report with the community, despite both identifying major Kent deck repairs nearly 2 decades ago? 2. Why did the board disregard the 2006 reserve study's recommendation to replace both Kent deck membranes by 2013, despite knowing the projected cost and timeline? 3. What justification exists for the board's decision to ignore the 2009 engineering report recommending full replacement of the Kent deck's structural substrata, and where is that decision documented? 4. If the board was aware as early as 2006 that reserves were insufficient to meet long-term obligations, how does it justify failing to raise dues in 10 of the years that followed, despite clear warnings from its own reserve study? 5. How can the board claim that no one anticipated structural issues when internal records from 2003, 2006, 2008, and 2009 all document serious concerns about the Kent decks? 6. Why did the board allocate over $170,000 for backyard fencing, $25,000 for mailboxes, speed bumps, multiple websites, social events, lighting upgrades, and other non-essential expenses instead of prioritizing the Kent deck repairs, despite knowing the decks posed a significant financial risk? 7. Does the board still divert reserve fund interest into the operating account instead of allowing it to compound in the reserve fund, as was the practice noted in past records? If so, what is the rationale, and is that documented? 8. What specific financial analysis or professional advice, if any, did the board rely on to support freezing dues for more than a decade while facing mounting capital obligations? 9. How does the board explain the reduction in projected Kent deck repair costs from $400,000 in 2006 to just $77,000 in the most recent reserve study, an 88% drop in nominal dollars? And where is this change justified in writing? 10. Why was the deck's useful life extended and cost projections altered without any corresponding explanation in the official records, and who authorized those changes? 11. Given that the board's own consultants projected a $708,000 reserve shortfall by 2024 if repairs were completed, why was no comprehensive long-term funding plan proposed or adopted? 12. Finally, how did a project estimated at $400,000 in 2013 shrink to just $77,000 in the most recent reserve study, without any clear explanation in the records, and without the treasurer or other board members noticing? The board claims this crisis was unforeseeable, but the HOA's own records, reserve studies, engineering reports, and meeting minutes document clear warnings dating back nearly 2 decades. These documents show the board was repeatedly informed of the risks, the projected costs, and the expected timeline. In our view, the decision not to act earlier was deliberate, not an oversight. An opinion supported by the board's records that seemingly document that the board shifted the financial burden onto future Highgate homeowners to avoid a special assessment nearly 2 decades ago. We urge you to listen to the story told by the facts, not the board's rhetoric. And if you do, we believe you'll agree that this statement from the 2006 reserve study still rings true today. Many items are not replacements, but are repair and restoration costs that can be foreseen.
Compare the board's rhetoric to the documented facts and determine for yourself whether their narrative is supported or undermined by the board's own records.
Don't depend on our research alone. Conduct your own. Ask questions, contact the board, demand answers. Attend meetings, be heard.
The information in this podcast is based on our review of available HOA records and reflects our personal opinions. We are not attorneys or accountants. We are 2 people with mics who are interested in assisting HOA members take back their community. Form your own opinions. Do not rely on ours.
Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share our podcast with your neighbors. Let's keep the conversation going. Until next time.